you don't necessarily need to know that, a psychopath does this and a narcissist does that and an antisocial does that. Essentially, what we need to know is that there are people out there who are dangerous to us, and we need to know the warning signs, and we need to know that it's highly unlikely that they will ever change, so that if we see them, we can get away from them.
What do you think is the most important of those things to know about them?
They do not have the ability to love.
Donna Andersen, what do you think a sociopath is?
Boy, did you start off with a hard question. Because there is a lot of disagreement about that. I refer to a sociopath as someone who intentionally harms other people. In fact, the word sociopath used to be a clinical definition for the disorder, but it no longer is. It no longer has any clinical meaning. However, what happens is, and this gets into the politics and the technology of the definitions and everything, but a lot of people now refer to someone who has antisocial personality disorder as a sociopath. However, I use the word sociopath on Love Fraud, which is my website, as an umbrella term for people who are intentionally destructive and manipulative of others. And in that, I include people who could be diagnosed clinically with antisocial, narcissistic, histrionic, and psychopathic personality disorder, and sometimes borderline personality
Mm.
disorder. There's a lot of disagreement or with borderline personality disorder because some people who have that are destructive and some are not. It kind of depends how you get it. But the idea is that all these disorders are so closely related. And what they have in common is that the people who have these disorders are destructive to other people in their lives, other relationships. So, you know, we need to know that they're out there. They probably make up about 12% of the population if you look at all these different disorders. And you don't necessarily need to know that, a psychopath does this and a narcissist does that and an antisocial does that. Essentially, what we need to know is that there are people out there who are dangerous to us, and we need to know the warning signs, and we need to know that it's highly unlikely that they will ever change, so that if we see them, we can get away from them.
Yeah. What do you think is the most important of those things to know about them?
That they exist.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the things that I work to do with my website, lovefraud.com, and of course, Love Fraud was one of the first websites on the internet to talk about this disorder or these disorders. And the hardest thing has been to convince people that they exist. I cannot tell you how many times I've spoken to survivors who have said, I had no idea that people like this existed. And so that's the main thing. We need to know that they're out there. And, once you get that in your head, then you can start to learn what the warning signs may be and, what their behavior is about. But first, we need to know that they exist.
Yeah. Don, I'm so glad you mentioned too that you've been doing this for a while, and I've been hearing about you for a while too. Love Fraud came up in an interview I did, I think, in February of last year, and I'm so glad that we're finally talking. How long has Love Fraud been going?
Oh, my goodness. It's been 20 years.
Wow.
I launched in July of 2005. So, back then, nobody was talking about this. Luckily, there is a lot of discussion now, although kind of referring to your initial question, most people talk about narcissists. And in my opinion, because I speak to survivors all the time, I have like more than 10,000 cases of people who have contacted me, and they start telling me, that they're involved with a narcissist and the person did this, and the person did that, and the person did this. And it's all the same things that antisocials or psychopaths are doing. So I kind of think what has happened is that narcissist is simply less scary people tend to think that, a psychopath is a serial killer and a sociopath is a serial killer. Well, this person's not a serial killer, so I guess he's not a psychopath. So it must be a narcissist. And, consequently, the people that are being talked about as narcissists, in my estimation, are probably mostly either antisocial or psychopathic.
Yeah. Yeah, there's one in particular whom I've dealt with, and the thing that made me kind of connect him to narcissism is that on top of all the dangerous behavior, he is obsessed with being the center of attention. And so that was the connection that I saw there. I wonder what you think of that.
Well, that's a narcissist.
Hmm.
But you also have to look at all the other behavior because what happens is, there is a disorder called narcissism, and those people want to be the center of attention. They tend to be very self-centered. They want what they want. But then if you start to see other behaviors, for example, grandiosity, if you see criminal behavior, essentially what happens is all narcissists, are not necessarily criminal. But
Yeah.
when you look at an antisocial, they are also narcissistic. And in fact, I have a colleague, Dr. Leanne Leadham, and who talks about this very eloquently. And essentially, there's this whole group of personality traits and behaviors that are called psychopathic personality traits, and there's like 20 of them. If you look at how psychopaths are diagnosed, but if you pick and choose different combinations of the traits, then you end up with a narcissist, then you end up with an antisocial, then you end up with somebody with ADHD. So all these disorders are interrelated, which again is why I refer to all of them as sociopaths, because what they have in common is that they are destructive to the people around them.
Yeah. Another phrase that I've heard around the idea of sociopath is that maybe a definition for it would be against society, that these
Correct.
people are just counter to the way that we want to function in a society.
Yes, absolutely. That's the whole thing, is that they do not follow the regular rules of society. Yeah,
Yeah.
and the key problem with these folks is that they do not have the ability to love. This is the key deficit with folks who have these disorders, or their ability to love is curtailed. They just simply do not have the ability to love the way other people do, or people who are not disordered, semi-normal people, those of us who just have our regular baggage, not necessarily, being, trying intentionally to hurt somebody. So what happens with these folks is that because they don't have the ability to love. And then what happens is that their dominance drive gets out of control, because we all have a certain numbers of inborn drives. And researchers have identified 4 social drives, and they include attachment, which is the desire to be around somebody. And then it includes sex, which is an obvious social drive. Then the other thing is caregiving. If when people really are in love with somebody or want to be around somebody, they want to take care of them. Sociopaths do not do caregiving. They do not have the ability to authentically take care of someone else, in that they cannot put their someone else's interest before their own. They can fake it sometimes, and this is where it starts to get confusing, because sometimes, like especially when they're in the early stages of reeling somebody in, they do things for them. They go out of their way. If the person is sick or needs assistance, they're falling all over themselves to help. But that's not authentic caregiving, because they're concerned about the person. It's a strategy. It's a strategy to reel somebody in. And it gets very confusing. But anyway, what happens, though, is that, these are the 3 basic components of romantic love: is attachment, sex, and caregiving. And now there's a 4th social strategy, which is power. Now, power isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's the power motivation that makes us want to succeed, that makes us want to, do good in school, that makes us want to have a hot car, is something along those lines. But because sociopaths do not have the authentic ability to love, that usually keeps the brakes on the power motivation. So what happens with them is their power motivation gets out of control, and essentially the only thing that sociopaths find intrinsically rewarding is dominating other people. I mean, that's the only thing that they really want. They do not, since they do not have the ability to love, they don't experience that. They don't really have any, there's no reference for what a good relationship feels like. So the only thing they know is power, control, and winning. So that's what they want.
Yeah. So Donna, how did you get started writing about this?
Well, I fell into it.
Yeah.
I married a man who turned out to be a con artist. I mean, this guy, when I met him, he took $227,000 from me. He cheated with at least 6 different women during our 2.5-year relationship. He had a child with one of those women. And then 10 days after I left him, he married the mother of the child, which turned out to be the second time he committed bigamy. Of course, I didn't know all that stuff until later, when I finally left him and started researching what was going on. And so luckily, I had a therapist at the time, an energy therapist, and I had been seeing her even before I got involved with this guy. So I'm talking to her. I'm saying, he's doing this, he's doing this, he's doing all this outrageous stuff, and it just makes no sense. And she says to me, he sounds like a sociopath. I'm like, sociopath? What's that? Yeah. So then I started researching it, and it was like, oh my God, I mean, this is what he is. And like the first book that I read was by Dr. Robert Hare called Without Conscience. And that's about psychopaths. And actually my ex was later clinically diagnosed as a psychopath. And so that's, I was like, oh my God, I have to tell people about this. Now, my background is journalism. And so people used to ask me, do you ever want to write a book? I don't want to write a book. That's too much work. But once this happened to me, I said, now I have this story that has to be told. And so first I launched the Love Fraud website, which went up in 2005, as I said. And then, it took me like 4 years to write the book. So that came out in like 2010. And that's, my personal story of what I went through. But the thing that's also interesting about my approach with that book is that I found multiple other victims and interwove the stories of what he did with them to what happened to me. And so, I mean, this was like, it wasn't just me. I mean, from what I could see, my ex was involved with like 20 or 30 other women, before and during our marriage. And this was the way he lived his life.
Yeah. Reading your book, the weight of all of the relationships that this man has been through and how they're just all destructive like this was really, really eye-opening. And I want to commend you too for, having the therapist who tells you this is a sociopath, and you have that eye-opening moment, like, oh, these people are out there, and then to go and pay it forward and to do all the work that you've done and to write about it. It just something like what I do with this show, and I'd really I think it's just amazing you've been doing it and doing it for a long time, and you're a pioneer and all that. So I just want to acknowledge you.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
Could we talk specifically about kind of some steps along that path? I'm wondering, first of all, like, how did you meet so that people can kind of see the patterns there?
Yes. I met online, but this was a long time ago. It was 1996. I mean, there weren't really any dating apps. Everybody was on AOL at the time. I mean, that's how primitive this was, and it was just text. You put the text in. And so, I mean, I had done it before and hadn't really had, a whole lot of success. And I was like, at this point, I was 40 years old and hadn't been married, could hear my biological clock, ticking very loudly. And, I had a copywriting business. I was making decent money. And so, I found this ad and it sounded very interesting. I mean, the guy, he says he's grieving is complete. And it described himself as a Sean Connery lookalike and a Vietnam veteran and a Hollywood scriptwriter. And I'm like, well, okay, well, this is interesting. And so, we tried it back and forth for about a month. And then finally we met in person. He was actually from Australia, although he was living near me. It wasn't a long distance relationship. He was a half an hour away. And so I met him. We first met for breakfast one morning, and when I met him in person, like the only thing he had in common with Sean Connery was that he was bald and had a beard, and I was looking at this guy and was like, oh my God, this not my type, like, at all. And then what he does is he pulls out a bunch of wedding pictures, okay? And so he's showing me the pictures of his previous wife who had died, and I'm like, this is weird. I've been single a long time. I've never seen anything like this. But he starts, pulling all these pictures out, and I'm kind of, backing away, and he says to me, I'm talking myself out of this, aren't I? And I'm like, well, why? Do you think we have a chance? And he looks at me and his eyes get kind of watery and he says, yeah, I think we do. And so he just laid it on so thick. And essentially what he did was what I learned later was a typical sociopathic strategy, which is called the pity play. He tried to make me feel sorry for him. He starts telling me, about his wife and they were home. They were both home alone, and then she cries out, and he rushes and takes her to the hospital, and she had, and she died. She had a heart attack and all this other stuff, and she would want me to continue. He says, so he just laid it on so thick, and he was charismatic. He was charming. He always knew what to say, and so I said, well, okay, this is interesting, and he just presented himself as this successful entrepreneur, and so I gave him a shot, and he just put it on so thick, which is another thing that he does. That's just what another warning sign is. I call it moves fast to hook up. I mean, he was going to reel me in, before I had time to change my mind. So it was shortly after that, when we met in person, that he actually proposed. And then it was shortly after that he starts talking about, all these business projects that he's working on, and how he wants to benefit me, and that we'll make such a great business team, and, with his entrepreneurial skills and my local contacts, and just lays it on really thick. And then he presents it that he wants me to prosper from these business opportunities. So, if I give him $5,000, I'll have a few points of ownership, but by this point I was already hooked,
Yeah.
because he had already proposed to me.
Yeah.
And I didn't know. I was one of those clueless people who had no idea that these people existed. I mean, you think of sociopath, you think serial killer, drug dealer, criminal or something like that. And he's always showing up with a jacket, and he's got a pocket scarf, and, and he's well spoken and everything. I had no clue. And so essentially, I mean, that's how it got started. And then he just moved it along very quickly. And before I knew it, I was $50,000 in debt.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it was amazing.
Yeah. So Donna, let's take a look at some of the elements of that. So he sends you his resume in advance?
Oh, he did. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
All kinds of documents, and which later turned out to be forged,
Right.
but that was
Right.
one of the things that he did for sure.
He shows up, and at this point, does he have a bag that's something like the, Medal of Honor Society or something like this
Yes.
as well? So he's
he-
got the paraphernalia, all the trappings.
Yep. Yes.
And
Yeah,
then
because he told me that he had won the Victoria Cross for his service in Vietnam, which is the equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor. So that's why he was, walking around with that.
Mhm. Yeah. And then the photo thing. I mean, this routine that he's got with the photos ready to go and to tell a story, and that's just a remarkable one. Are you familiar with how pickup artists have been working in recent years, and people like Neil Strauss, these guys who have kind of codified pickup artistry?
Well, I imagine it has a lot in common with sociopathic behavior.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things that they talk about is having sort of a photograph routine ready to go. And it used to be, when people would carry prints, they'd act like they were just coming from Rite Aid or wherever you get your prints. And they'd pull out an envelope of prints and they'd be like, oh, and they just happen to have pictures of them with interesting people doing important things, much like James Montgomery had with this bag and the resume and everything like that. It's a whole thing. I actually met the attorney for one of these guys, and he then started to do this photo routine on me. He said, you know what? I'll show you some stuff. And he says, it's on an old laptop in the other room. I'll be right back. And I knew what it was. And yet it was still so compelling.
Hmm.
The story was so refined that I wanted to see where the story went, even though I knew the game.
Hmm.
And I think, these things that are too good are something that we have to kind of watch out for. Was there anything else like that early on?
Oh my goodness. Well, yeah. He brought me one of the things that he did. Now, of course, this man was from Australia. Was had just come to the area, where his actually the wife who died, that she was up here, and that was why he came here. But while he was here, he decided to found a Lions Club. Okay, a service organization in this little town, and he gets all these people to come and be part of his Lions Club. And so he brought me to they have this dinner, with the ceremony where the club is chartered and everybody's there in black tie and all this other stuff, and so this was just, a few months into it. And then so another thing that they do, and here's one of the things, like he had told me that he was this Vietnam veteran, okay, and so it was we met in the summertime, and then coming to November, it's Veterans Day, and so he tells me that he's giving a keynote presentation at a Veterans Day ceremony, an outdoor thing, and he wants me to be there, okay. So and at the meantime, I'm the only one who's working here. I've got a business to run. I've got all this stuff to do, and he wants me to drop everything and go out and watch him at this presentation, a flag ceremony or something like that. So I'm like, all right, and then I go to leave, and I can't find my keys. I can't find my car keys. And so, I was like, oh, well, I guess I'm not going to make it, and so I didn't show up. So he comes back and then, reels into me for not showing up to his ceremony when he probably took my car keys so that I couldn't. And he says, well, why don't you take a cab, to come out there? It's a half an hour away. I'm not going to take a cab. I got all this work to do. I couldn't. But it was one of those things. This is one of those gaslighting things, where what he was trying to do was make it so that I felt indebted to him, or that I felt that I had done something wrong, and use it as an excuse to kind of berate me and say that you must not really love me because you wouldn't come out, and it was more important for you to stay home and work than get a cab to go out there, when in fact he may have, I mean, I don't know this for sure, but my keys never go missing, so why is it at this particular time that they're missing? So he may have staged the whole thing.
Oh, almost certainly. I mean,
Yes.
you're living with a sociopath, and
Right.
like you call it a gaslighting thing, or sort of being put in a one down position where then you somehow are the scapegoat, or you are the problem, and you have to redeem yourself
Right.
somehow. Towards the end of my time with the one who I dealt with, it seemed as though nothing I did was right. There was always some sort of trick, some sort of game where I would think I was doing something, and then it would be interpreted very differently. It escalates, and it's the pattern.
Yeah. And one of the things that they do is they keep moving the goalposts.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, you do something, and or they tell you this is what I want. You do what they want. Well, I don't want that. Now I want this. And this goes on, and this is why people are so confused by these experiences. It's like, you can't figure out what they want because they keep changing what they want, and this is part of the manipulation, is because they're trying to keep you off balance so that you're always, the more off balanced you are, the less you can figure out what's going on, and the less you can find yourself and say, wait a minute, something's not right here. And, you're just always in a tailspin about what's going on.
Yeah. Donna, in my experience, I wasn't doing any of the talking. It seemed that the person I was around, he just had everything to say. He was doing all the talking all the time. In your case, did you have a sense that he was interested in who you really were? Was there much of an exchange, or were you kind of just, taken into the tornado?
Well, both things happened,
Mm.
and what happens is that in the beginning, they listen very carefully to everything that you're saying.
Yes.
Okay. So there are a lot of questions, and they listen, and they put on this act that you think they're so smitten with you that, that they really are interested in everything about you. And so that's how it is in the beginning. But what happens is that later on, and the other thing that happens is that, you start to feel comfortable with them because they seem to be so interested in you that you share your deep, dark secrets, and you tell things, about yourself, and you say what's really important to you and all of this. So then what happens is that once things start to go bad, or once they start to assert themselves, then they take all those things that you told them in confidence and use it as ammunition against you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would say that in the beginning, absolutely, they're interested in everything about you because they are looking for the deepest place to set that hook. I mean, they are looking to find out what your dreams are and promise to make them come true because that is what's going to hook you. Of course, it never happens, but that's the objective.
Yeah, definitely. And with that too, it's like there is this bait. It's like a bait and switch kind of sensation in how when they know you, then they know, like you use the phrase hook. I mean, hook, bait, it's all there though, that thing that's out there, but it's never going to happen. It's just a dream. It's just a fantasy. And when this person is larger than life too, it can seem very flattering. Like, wow, this guy, like in your case, he's a Hollywood director and a war hero and 1,000 other things. And he's going to take this time for me. Like there must be something really special here.
And that's exactly how I felt. I mean, I thought I just landed Superman,
Yeah.
but then of course you find out that everything was false. I mean, in the end, I find out that he was never in the military. I mean, this man had the nerve to stand, put on a uniform and stand in front of all these people and talk about valor on Veterans Day. He was never in the military. The whole thing was made up. And all the documents that he showed me, about his mention in dispatch and all these other things, it was all fake. He had stolen other people's identities and used it, and later on, after I split up with him and started going through all these papers, the man was a pack rat. I made an office for him in my house. It was covered with papers everywhere. But once we started going through the papers, I actually found these original documents that were whited out, where he put his name in instead of the original person's name in. And it was just like amazing that, and of course, this was before there was Photoshop. I mean, now, with Photoshop, what people do is to create these documents and change things. I mean, unless you really know what you're looking at, you can't tell.
Yeah. So Donna, you said he proposes very quickly, very early on. How does he propose?
He just called me on the phone.
He did it over the phone.
It was like we had a rendezvous, and then after that, he's just like, will you do me the honor of being my wife? And I was just so taken aback by the whole thing and swept up in the excitement of it all that, I said yes.
Yeah. Did you feel like your mind was different? Did you feel a sense of being in a trance, or was it just like an emotional pull? Like what was happening to sort of override your normal discernment?
Well, yes, it was highly emotional, and this is kind of normal for this situation. In fact, this is something that con artists know.
Yeah.
Con artists know that if they can get you emotional, and it doesn't matter what the emotion is, it can be positive or negative. But he's I'm excited. This man's telling me he's in love with me. This has never happened to me. This is all this, and so your reason goes out the window. And in fact, con artists have a term for it. They call it, putting them under the ether, and they know that if they can get someone emotional, and that's why, like today, when people call, you hear these scams where, people call up older people and say, your granddaughter's in trouble and all this other stuff. It's the same thing. I mean, they're getting somebody upset. And because they know that when people are emotional for any reason, that you don't make good decisions. And so that's what they're doing.
Yeah. So he does it over the phone. There's no ring. He's in a hurry to get somewhere else. What is happening in the near term after the proposal?
Well, he did show up with a ring, like the
Okay.
next day or
The next
something
day.
like
Okay.
that, and it was, and then he gave me a story about the ring. He told me that it was this ring that had, some famous person, actress had worn in a play or something like that, and it's not a diamond, but it had, it was, this woman wore it in the, and whatever. So then what he does, okay, he has this friend, um, um, Roger. And so anyway, this guy is Australian, and essentially what they are is co-conspirators. So we go out to dinner. He brings me. We go out to dinner for an official celebration, and we go to dinner, and so then we come back, and we're sitting on my porch, and lo and behold, the phone rings. Okay, and it's his friend Roger calling from Australia, and wants me to, so he says, "Oh, say hello to Roger." So I'm talking with Roger, and Roger's saying something about, well, he's such a great guy, and this is very exciting, and you'll have to come visit and everything like that. So we said, okay, fine. And then a little while later, now as backstory, what had happened was, this was when the which flight was it? TWA flight was shot out of the sky, or broke down in off of Long Island. So this is in 1996. This is what's going on. So he had told me that he was going on a special mission, to go after the people who had shot this plane out of the sky. So after I talked to Roger, a few minutes later, his phone rings again, and he says, "Yes, sir." "No, sir." "Sir, we really shouldn't be talking about this on this. This is just a handheld radio phone, and everything." And so, obviously Roger had called him to stage this call to
Right.
convince me that he was actually going on this mission to, to go see the bad guys, and then he sent me these faxes, because this is back when there were faxes, that he's away, and I'm sending these faxes via my uncle's satellite, which would be Uncle Sam, and just to, I'm thinking of you. I'm here in the desert, in some place where, people would get in, our government would be embarrassed if they knew about it. But he has this whole elaborate thing, and it was all fake.
Yeah.
So, and there were multiple occasions when that happened.
Yeah. The use of other people is incredibly powerful, because we want to believe that a group of people, would be honest, but a group of people can be lying, or they can be misled.
Mhm.
And these people do look to collect those people who will sort of follow along with their vision, or get other people bought up in the myth around them.
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
that happened. In fact,
Yeah.
several of them really didn't know how
Hmm.
bad he was,
Right.
because I found that out afterwards, after everything fell apart, and I went to talk to some of these people who were supposed to be his business associates, and they were kind of shocked. They said, they knew that he talked a lot, but they didn't think it was this bad. And so they can reel people in, and the people are not aware that they're essentially being used as to validate their story.
Right. At some point too, he gives you fake dog tags, I think, and says, remember me by these. I'm going out of town, or something like that. I
Oh
have that in
gosh,
my notes.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
And this whole list of, drug cartel leaders and all this other stuff, and later on, we actually did turn that over to the FBI. I mean, I don't know if it was real or not, but he made a big production out of, if anything happens to me, here's people to contact and everything, and it was just crazy.
yeah. So he moves in with you. What's the move in like?
Well, he didn't ask to move in. He said, he lives out in this townhouse, which was his, deceased wife's townhouse. And I have a shore, I live in Atlantic City, so I have a house in Atlantic City. So he says, well, where shall we live? Shall we live in our place in the woods, which was the townhouse, or should we live at the beach? Well, I'm not going to move, So, and of course, he knew that, and plus, it's like, okay, and well, he starts talking about that, and I'm like, well, James, we've only known each other a short time. Don't you think we should slow this down? And he goes, oh, teenagers live together. We know what we're doing. Why don't we do this? And so I said, okay, fine. And he gets, some people to help him move in. But but later, of course, I find out that he had to leave, because the previous wife had died, and her parents were the executors of the estate. He didn't own it, although he told me that he did, and so they were selling it. And so he had to find a place to live. And so that was an incentive for him to, find someone to move in with very quickly.
Yeah. So his con is up with the last living situation.
Yes.
And he's gotta move to the next. He's gotta keep moving things along.
Right.
And so he comes to you. And he brings in animals?
Oh,
like
yeah.
Pets and things?
Yeah. So he had, when I first met him, he had a pet hedgehog.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I didn't know anything about hedgehogs. And then, later on, he comes in. What was the second one? I think it was the chinchilla. So, we had a hedgehog and a chinchilla. He likes exotic pets. And then he goes and buys, he comes in with this little bag, and it's moving, there's something in the bag. And I had a dog at the time. The dog's going nuts. This thing's moving in the bag. And he brings in like a bird cage, and it's a sugar glider, which is a small marsupial from Australia. It looks like a chipmunk. And so he brings this thing in, and he tells me that, the owner of the pet store said that if he would agree to tell nice people about the what this animal was like, then it would be like, he gave it to him at a discount or something like that. So we got this little animal, and then later on he got another marsupials. These sugar gliders should have two of them, because they're social animals. So we got another one. And, later on I find out that, that he never cut any kind of deal for this sugar glider. He just paid money, for the whole thing, but he's always making up a story.
Yeah.
And I mean, the animals were cute. But the thing was, he didn't take care of them. Now I'm the one taking care of the animals.
Yeah.
So.
And the sugar gliders, named them after the two of you?
Yes. The female was named Jamie after James, and the male was named Donald after me.
Yeah. So something about this that I wonder about is that I've read that sometimes a strategy will be to create images for the target that make them feel as though they're sort of trapped with the predator. And so the idea of the two of you by proxy in this cage, and also he's now moved into your home and sort of has this lock on you all the time. He knows where you are, what you're doing. He can keep you tired, keep you busy. I wonder what you think of that.
Well, that's an interesting observation, and I had never thought about that particular aspect of it, that it was kind of like a metaphor for my situation. In all honesty, the animals were cute.
Sure.
I kind of liked them.
Yeah, definitely.
So, I mean, they were nice. They were nice to have.
Yeah, I wonder about this in my own experience, because the guy I talked to, he would use these images of like being in a cave or in a bubble. And when I realized what was going on and I got away, I had nightmares where I was in a cave, and I was like, other people who I'd introduced to him were in these nightmares, and I was trying to get them out of the cave. But there was this sense that I think his words they're master storytellers. I think his words had sort of created this image of being stuck with him. And so the idea of the two of you represented as animals in a cage just seems something interesting to me.
Yeah. That's a great observation. I never noticed that.
Maybe, yeah. What was the significance, do you think, of his access to being able to say, I'm doing something in Australia, I'm running off to Australia, or I have this Australian connection, the whole international element?
He was making himself larger than life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same thing with the military. Like he claimed to be in the military because when you do that, then you have this mantle of respectability, and this mantle of trustworthiness. I mean, it was all image management, and trying to make himself larger than he was, and to make himself be appealing. And I know from talking to lots of people that so many do the military angle. I mean, all kinds of people are pretending to be military when they're not. And mostly the reason is to make themselves seem respectable so that they can convince other people to trust them to do whatever they want them to do.
Right. Yeah, the one I've dealt with, he says he was in the military. I'll never know. And he also, like yours, he would say that he was CEO of multiple companies. That was one of his favorite things to tell people about what he does for work. I eventually looked him up, and he's a project manager, but he says CEO of multiple companies. So all these patterns and the international man of mystery kind of thing too. It's always an excuse. I would think, oh, I've got to be up late for something in Australia, or I've got to go somewhere to take care of something with Australia, or you wouldn't understand because it's Australian. It seems very convenient.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's all part of the brainwashing and the
Hmm.
gaslighting. It's the idea is to make it so that um, that I did view him as larger than life and therefore respectable and therefore willing to keep paying his expenses, which is what his objective was.
Right. So you want to get married, and then there's this idea back to the Australia thing and the military thing all wrapped in one, that his military pension is going to require you to get married before the end of the year. So there's
Correct.
this hustle. How does the marriage go?
Oh my goodness. We fought on the wedding night.
Hmm.
I mean, it
Yeah.
was like, because, we actually had two marriages. We did go to Australia to get married, specifically for that reason, because he told me that, yeah, he wanted to take care of me or make sure that I was taken care of.
Of course.
And that, they had just passed this law. And, anyone who got married like after the end of that year, which would have been 1996, who was a foreigner would not be entitled to his military pension. Of course, there was no pension, but it was an excuse to, hurry up and go to Australia and get married. I mean, the objective was to get me to sign the dotted line, as soon as possible so that, then I felt attached to him, and it worked. I felt that, this was my husband. My job as a wife is to support my husband and, to work towards both of us to our what I thought were our shared goals. I didn't realize that it was all fake. But it was all part of, trying to move it along. And he embarrassed me in Australia, and at one point, like threw the ring on the bed. Are you sure you want to do this? And of course, you don't say no. Like, let's call it off. Or at least I didn't. And so there's always this pattern of digging the hook in a little bit more and making it difficult for you. And as you said earlier, the one up position, he
Hmm.
needs to be in that dominant position. And yeah, anything that he can do to make it look like, I did something wrong or I screwed up or I wasn't supportive enough or whatever, it just changes. It allows him to exert power and puts me in the inferior position. And the more you're in the inferior position, the harder it is to see what's going on and to get out.
Right. And out of your element. I mean, you're having this sort of secret wedding because you want to do this one to get the economic advantages and things, but you're going to have another one later. You're out of your home country. You're surrounded by his people. It's kind of a dizzying thing. You're going all around and seeing people. And then there's a thing with a video camera. And sometimes these are master storytellers. They like to kind of make people actors in their movies. What's going on with the filming and things?
Well, he was always taking movies,
Yeah.
and some of them were, kind of spicy, I guess you could say. But it was just he presented himself to be this Hollywood director, so of course he
Hmm.
has a camera, and of course he's taking pictures and things like that. So it was just something that he did all the time.
So when you get home, what's going on then in your space, your routine, your work, things like that?
Well, while we were away, I had some contractor friends of mine who were supposed to make some improvements to the ground floor of my house, where we were installing a new bathroom because I only had one. My house is 100 years old, so it didn't come with modern amenities. But anyway, so they were supposed to be working, and we were gone for 2 weeks, and they didn't finish. And so, he just flies into a rage. I'm supposed to be here and hit the ground running, and what's the matter with these clowns? And why can't they get something done? I mean, it was almost done. They just had to finish the painting. But I was, it just became another example of him trying to, lord it over on me, that I had done something wrong and that my contacts didn't work, and that, it was just, I mean, every time they do that, it puts you on the defensive. And, the defensive is not a good place to be because it, becomes very difficult.
Yeah. So when you want to defend yourself and you start objecting to things, maybe the money, the spending of money and things like that, what's he doing to stop you from getting your objections through?
Right. So what happens is, like, we got married in Australia in October. And then, we planned a second wedding in January where all my family was going to come and everything like that. So, but in the meantime, as I said, I've spent $50,000 on this man, and yeah, I'm concerned, because my liquid cash is gone and my credit cards are starting to fill up, and he kept promising that he's going to, as soon as this deal gets done, we'll have the money, we'll pay the credit cards, and so, finally, it was right around Christmas. I wanted to talk about this situation, and so what we would do is we call it a board meeting. The two of us would get together. We'll have to schedule a board meeting. So
Hmm.
okay, so we have this board meeting, and I ask him a bunch of minor things, and then I get to, well, we've spent $50,000, and he's like, so. I'm like, well, that's a lot of money. He goes, no, it's not. I mean, with the millions that we're going to have coming in, $50,000 is nothing. And I said, well, I'm concerned because it was, this is all going on my credit cards. Is so, we'll just have the accountants pay for it. Just pay the minimum. Don't worry about it. And essentially, what he did was he dismissed all my concerns. It was just like, my concerns were not valid. He didn't care, to. I mean, this was traumatic for me. I wasn't, that wealthy that, I could just, part with $50,000 with, I mean, that hurts. And he just dismissed the whole thing, had no interest in addressing the issues at all.
Yeah, I've heard those sort of things called thought killing phrases, where it's just you're presenting something and then they just try to shut you down. In cults and things, they can use things like, well, the end of the world is coming. We've got to get ready for this, or the revolution is not a tea party. We gotta really work, and then they squash people so that they can just keep moving with their agenda.
And actually, probably every single cult leader is a sociopath,
Yeah, you think so?
because it's the same skill set,
Hmm.
that the cult leaders have and these con artists have.
Yeah, yeah. What's the difference?
I don't think there is any.
Scale, maybe.
I'm sorry?
Scale, maybe. I mean,
Well,
I think
yes
we're
and
talking about them
no,
more in
because
relationships.
I've done articles where I talk about people are in a cult of one.
Yeah.
You have one guy, or a woman. I mean, I do want to, make the point that there certainly are females who can do this. But it's the same pattern, it's the same skills. And cult leaders, yes. I mean, I've spoken with people who, just one family is a cult, where people are, the leader, the sociopath is just lording over them. It's more the behavior pattern than anything else.
Right. So Donna, you're presenting these things. You're getting shut down. You're confused. I mean, how are you feeling at this point?
It was very confusing.
Yeah.
And confusion is one of the big warning signs that you're dealing with a sociopath, because, things don't make any sense. I mean, this man is my husband. Why is he, not at all concerned that I'm upset about the money? And why is he taking these trips, and they're business trips, and they're all on weekends? What's this about? And it was very confusing. And there was a battle, within me, because I took my wedding vows seriously, and I didn't realize that this man did not, take the wedding vows seriously. And I mean, none of that, I understood none of that until much later on. But so mostly I was confused. I was like, I mean, I'm trying to figure out how to deal with this. I'm trying to figure out how to keep all these plates in the air. And it was just a very difficult situation.
Hmm. So then, to keep you on the go and everything, things escalate to a point where you're going to move to Florida. What's going on there?
Well, what happened was that, he kept having all these business plans and nothing was working out.
Mm.
And then surprisingly, one did start to work out. And what it was this was back in 1997 when the Titanic movie came out. And he met up with another person who lived locally, and they went to they started talking about, wouldn't it be great to have a good Titanic exhibition? And so they ran with it, and they managed to find investors. I mean, I thought the whole thing was just another pipe dream of his, but they did get investors. These people, put $500,000 into it, and he started collecting these Titanic artifacts, and he was going to schedule a show, a gate admission type show at exhibits for people to go through. And so I was working on that, researching all the Titanic stuff, coming up with the posters that would explain everything, and the show design, and things like that. So it was supposed to be here in Atlantic City, and then the whole thing fell apart. Essentially what happened was the investors reneged and did not come through with all the money that they said they were going to put into it. So now it's like we've got half a show. We have a design, we have these artifacts. I mean, we actually had two Titanic lifeboats. One from the movie. It was a movie prop, and then the other one was possibly an original from the Titanic. It was built by the company Harlan and Wolff that actually constructed the lifeboats on the Titanic, and we had one of those, and we had a bunch of other things, and so we have this stuff. So he tells me that he worked out a deal with a guy who had dinner theaters in Orlando, and that we had an opportunity to open the show in Orlando. So, we packed everything up. It's 1,000 miles away, so we go down to Orlando. And I went and met with the guy, and I saw the location, and I was like, oh my God. I mean, the place that he picked was, Wild Bill's restaurant. I mean, it looked like the Old West from the 1880s. It looked like a log fort. And I said, how are we going to put a Titanic show in this place? It makes no sense whatsoever. He goes, no, we're going to do it. It's going to work. He wants to do it. This is what the location going to be. So I'm like trying to figure out how this is going to work. And then what happened was we were there for about a month, maybe 6 weeks. And so I said to him, I want to find out, like, when exactly is the show going to open? And he says, like, well, I'll get back to you. And I'm like, well, don't we have a deal? And he goes, well, not yet. And at this point I was like, oh my God. He dragged me all the way down to Florida, spending money that we didn't have, essentially on a gamble. What he said was that, well, if the guy comes through, we have to be ready here and ready to start. And I said to him, you mean you did this, as a risk? And he said, well, yeah, but I did it for you. I know how upset you were from, everything that was happening, and I know how important this is to you. So, and I, at this point, I mean, my knees buckled. I just like totally almost lost it, because I was just in shock that he would be so cavalier about, but I mean, by this point I was pretty much broke. And so we're going down there on the chance that the guy, might have us in this show. It was just mind boggling to me.
Yeah, Donna, at that point, and we're talking about sums of money, $50,000 and $225,000 and stuff. That's 1990s dollars. I mean,
Yes.
this is a serious financial hardship that you're under,
Yes.
and you are led to believe by your husband that there's a solution and that there's a deal in the works, but he's just making things up.
Right.
He's just telling you, well, it's going to be January, well, it's going to be February, but it's just thin air.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
It was all fake.
Yeah.
The whole thing was fake.
So what do you do?
Well, what happened was that at this point, there was a company called SFX, and it was a legitimate exhibition company. And my ex-husband told me that he had contacted them, and they are in the process of developing their own Titanic exhibition in Orlando, and that they're interested in purchasing the artifacts that we have. So we've got maybe $100,000 worth of artifacts or something like that. And so he tells me that he's going to a meeting. He has to go to a meeting up in New York. And I'm like, good, go. and sell, just let's get rid of this stuff, put it out of its misery. I really want this to be done. So, I've taken him to the airport. I took, just the last $200 on one of my credit cards to get him an airplane ticket to go back to Atlantic City, and he was going to make his way up to New York for this meeting. And so we're driving to the airport. And in the meantime, I had been looking for some rings that I had because I was so broke that I was thinking of taking them to a pawn shop to cash these rings in so that I could buy food. I mean, that's how bad it was. And so I asked him when we're on our way to the car, or on the way to the airport, I said, well, where are my rings? And he tells me, well, they're in a lockbox in my office. So he had, gotten them out of like my jewelry box and put them in a lockbox in the office. And, so we get there and I'm like, take whatever they offer you, let's just get done with this. And he slams down the trunk and leaves. And so I go back to the apartment and I go looking for this lockbox. So I find the lockbox and I open it up and I find the rings. And I also find photographs of him with a baby. And then I find a birth certificate of him listed as the father of this baby who was conceived and born during our marriage. And then I find all these other papers indicating that these other women are buying computers for him. And, at this point I was like, oh my God, this is like unbelievable. So I said, okay, this is it. I mean, I had been honoring my vows, is to stand by my husband. I thought it was my duty to support my husband's business dreams and his interests. But this was different. This was different. Now he's cheating on me. And actually, my initial reaction was relief. It was like,
Wow.
now I can leave.
Mm-hmm.
Now I don't have to stand by these wedding vows anymore. He's already broken him. Now I can leave. But now he's on his way back to my house. And so I'm worried about, oh my God, what's he going to do? And so when he gets there and he calls me back and he says, how you doing? Oh, I'm fine. Yeah. How are we? Oh, just fine. Did you have a good trip? So I didn't tell him, what was going on. And then as soon as he was off the phone, I'm like packing up and I'm ready to leave.
Yeah, and you know how to do that trip at that point. You've already made the trip alone.
Yes,
the first
I
time,
know
so you get
how
the
to get
U-Haul
this.
and get all the animals, and you're on the road.
Right.
So, in the normal circumstance, maybe that would kind of be the end of the story. You could cut ties and you could go, but that's not how your story goes. I mean, what's all the untangling like?
Well, now we have all this Titanic artifacts and who owns this stuff? And actually, the way we had set it up as a corporation, I was the president of the corporation and I was the key owner of this. And then we have the other guy who's the business partner. And so I'm talking to him and he's a straightforward guy. He's a straight arrow. So he's like, well, I guess we're partners now. But in the meantime, James, my ex, has some of the important artifacts with him. So we want them back. And we still think that we can put a show together because we have this stuff. So it was this whole mess, and then what happens is that I also start getting mail. And come to find out, he would always go to the mailbox first, and get the mail, so I could not see, I didn't see what was coming in. So now he's gone and I get the mail and I get this letter that tells me that he's got a secret voicemail account. And he's been giving out this phone number and talking to people, that I can't see on the regular. And so I see all these numbers. And one of them coordinates with numbers that I found on these other documents. And so I figure out that there's this woman who lives in Pennsylvania that he's having an affair with and that she's been giving him money. So I call her up and I say, hello, I'm Donna Andersen. I'm James Montgomery's wife, and I'd like to advise you not to give him any more money. She says, it's too late. I already gave him $92,000. So he had been doing this, to her all along. And then what happens is that, we start exchanging notes. We start telling what's going on. And actually, we became very good friends. And we worked together to do what we could to retrieve our money from him and to see what was going on. And, it was actually a blessing because we both understood where we had been and what had happened and what he was like. And it was just life-saving to have someone who could be supportive, you know. So we were working together. And that's one of the things, you know, that's so difficult when people are in these situations, is that it's so fantastical that people don't want to believe it. You know, you try telling your story to someone and they're like, ugh, you're making that up. Ugh, it couldn't possibly be, you know, and things
Right.
like that. But, you know, since we did have, we supported each other, and that was very helpful.
You use the word blessing. One of the titles on your cover, How Marriage to a Sociopath Fulfilled My Spiritual Plan. There's a spiritual element to all this for you. What is that, Donna?
Well, that was actually the lesson of the whole thing, in that now, as I'm going through all this, I'm still working with my energy therapist, who does have a spiritual dimension to her work, and so it turned out that I was processing what had happened to me, and learning what had happened, and we'd find all these things, and it was just another outrage and another outrage. And so it's like, how do you process all of this stuff, you know, because it's just mind-boggling, and how can somebody be so deceitful, and how can they just run you through the ringer like this? And so as I worked with her, um what we were able to uncover was that I learned that I had multiple past lives with my ex-husband. And that, and it got to the point, you know, I was so in doing this work so intensely that I could actually see them. And I would be with her, you know, maybe every 6 months or so. Then we would do phone, because she was living in California, so she would like fly back and forth to see her clients. But then we would talk on the phone. But then it got to the point where I could do it myself, you know, where I could, you know, when I would feel these emotions come up, and then start to, what is this? What's going on here? And then I could actually like channel the experience, and start to see what was going on myself. So it turned out that I had made a decision before reincarnating this time, that I had all these past lives with my ex-husband, and every single time he beat me, he killed me. I mean, sometimes I was a man, sometimes I was a woman, and I had made a decision that this time I was going to put an end to it. I mean, that was my plan, you know, coming into this life. Well, the way the universe works is that, you know, when you want to get rid of something, they give you more of it. You know, so I want to get rid of this guy, and they give me more of him, and it becomes this whole outrage. And the idea is to, you know, find that deep pain that had been carried over multiple lifetimes, and finally get to the root of it and allow it to come to the surface, you know, because that's what happens in these situations. And we kind of get into the energetic ideas, you know, they're kind of ideas that, you know, people talk about chakras and auras, and things like that. But what happens is that when we have these experiences, and we all have them. They don't have to be as dramatic as what I went through with my ex-husband, but anytime we have a pain, anytime we have a wound, anytime we have a disappointment, if we don't process it right away, which we usually don't, because nobody teaches people how to process these things, they get stuck inside us, and they get stuck there, you know, until we figure out a way to access it and release it. So that's what I did, was that, you know, I was able to see these past lives, and it's kind of like a dream where you kind of see what goes on. It's not a real clear picture, but you get impressions. And I was able to process the emotions of it. And what it turned out to be was that I simply had to make a decision to let it go. And that's where the healing was.
Wow. Donna, for you with the recovery process, you made that decision. I wonder what else there would be. You know, people now we're becoming more aware that these people are out there. What else would you have to share for people who are trying to recover from dealing with someone like this?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, the way we typically get into these situations is because of these wounds. that you have. And it could be from, the last relationship. It could be from multiple relationships. Often it's because of parents, because unfortunately, there's a lot of sociopaths. They have kids. A lot of people who end up in these situations realize that, my goodness, I just got involved with somebody who was just like my mother or my father. And that happens a lot. So what happens is, you have these experiences, and it creates these wounds, and the sociopaths just have radar for those wounds. And that's, we talked earlier about how, they're always asking the questions, and they want to know everything about you.
Yeah.
Well, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for, what are those wounds? What are those sore spots where they can latch their hooks, where they can hook into you. So that's what happens for many people. You have these vulnerabilities that have been created by prior experiences, prior wounds that are not that have not been processed. And so I often say to people that I work with that there is a silver lining to the experience of being with a sociopath. And the silver lining is that it is so awful that you finally have to deal with all those emotional wounds from the past. And so it does. It gives you an opportunity to do all that emotional housekeeping from, releasing the pain of what happened not only in this particular time, but all those previous times. Because if you can go, it's kind of like, pulling on a piece of yarn. The further you go, you find these other memories of different things that have happened that you're still carrying the pain around. So it gives you an opportunity to release that and get it out of your system. And that's where the healing is, and that's where you can really move forward.
Mm-hmm. For you, was there a big lesson in all of that that stands out?
Well, it was about letting it go,
Mm-hmm.
because in my case, with all these multiple lifetimes, I'm going to fix him. I'm going to make this guy, be a normal human being, and I'm going to make him atone, and I'm going to make him, feel remorse. It's not my job. My job is to take care of me and, my own spiritual path, my own spiritual growth. And so that was it. The idea was to finally get his hook out of my heart and let it go.
Wow. And at the same time, in the groundings of the world, you have a right to seek legal recourse. And so you get into the courts. How does that go?
Well, I mean, it was an awakening, because I thought I would get to court and they would see that obviously this guy was a con man, and, and give me everything that I asked for, and it'll be done. Well, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
He had his right to be in court. Although he didn't do it, he hired an attorney for a while, and we're going back and forth. And plus we had all this, Titanic stuff to sort out too. So we go to court, and eventually, he just stops participating. He fired his attorney, and said that he was representing himself, and then just didn't show up. So when we actually did end up going to court, he wasn't there, but we still had to present our case and get a ruling so that I could get a divorce. And so we did. And the judge awarded me everything that I asked for. He had taken $227,000 from me. And I asked for triple damages, which is like in a divorce, nobody gets damages. It's like crazy. But we had the trial, and I had 3 other women plus the parents of the woman who died all testified at my trial, about their experience, and talking, so that essentially we established that this was the way this man lived his life. And so the judge awarded me everything that was taken from me plus $1 million in punitive damages. Nobody gets punitive damages in a divorce. But then you learn that the court doesn't help you collect damages. So I had to, now I'm a judgment creditor. I have a judgment against him, and I have to get another attorney to try and find, to get the money. And from the 5 of us, the 5 women who testified at that trial, he took more than $1 million. I couldn't imagine that it was all gone. It had to be somewhere. He had to stash it in, some bank account in Australia or New Zealand or something like that. So, I hired an international search agent, and tried to find him and everything. And eventually I failed. I wasn't, all I recovered was $517. I mean, that's all I got that was taken from me. And, it was kind of interesting because getting back to the universe aspect of this, I mean, that had kept me going. I'm going to get this judgment. I'm going to get this, then I'm going to find his money, and then I'm going to be made whole. And when I had to give up and realize that I wasn't going to get any of that money back, that's when I collapsed. But it's also when I let everything go. And that's when I learned that, the universe plan is that, in fact, I said, well, why did you tell me this is all going to work out? Why was I getting these messages to keep going? And, the answer was that had I quit earlier, I wouldn't have gotten the lesson.
Was it worth it?
Well, it was. I did get the judgment, and that's what enabled me to tell my story and name him. Because in fact, I've been on TV 3 times. The last show that I did, which is called Love, Honor, and Betray. It's now appearing on HBO Max and Hulu. But I've done multiple shows on this. I can talk to you. I've talked to other people, and the reason that I can do this is because I have a judgment that proves that he committed fraud.
Mm-hmm.
And that he is a criminal. So I'm not libeling him because he never came after me anyway. But I did finally expose him in Australia. When I finally had to give up on getting my money back, then I was able to file a bankruptcy claim against him. It was actually, I think it was another year before I finally found him because I didn't know where he was. He left the country, and then I finally located him in Australia, and he had gotten a job. I was like, a job? This man has never had a job. He got a job. And so then I got my Australian attorney, and we were able to serve him with bankruptcy papers. And at the same time, I had gotten in touch with an organization in Australia called Australia and New Zealand Military Imposters. And what they did was expose military frauds. So I had all these documents that he sent me, his picture on the cover of Soldier of Fortune and these ID cards, Delta ID cards. Nobody has Delta ID cards, Delta Force. They don't exist. But I had all this stuff and I sent it to him and everything. And they researched it and proved that he was never in the military. So in 2005, I launched Love Fraud, and at the same time, they exposed him on their website, Australia and New Zealand Military Imposters, which actually doesn't exist anymore. But then they also had contacts with the Australian media. And so they feed the story to this guy, and they do this big story in the newspaper, like a tabloid newspaper in Sydney, and meet major fraud, and they have this picture on the front, and it was just. I mean, it was so funny, because at that point, in the meantime, I had, recovered emotionally and met a man, and we got married. We've been married for 20 years, and it's all very happy. So anyhow, Australia is, they work when we're sleeping. So every morning I go to my email and say, okay, what happened today? And so this thing comes out in the newspaper. And the way I find out about it is that I get a call from this man who's in charge of the Rotary Club in Bathurst, Australia. And so I say, he tells me, well, I see this story in the newspaper about James Montgomery, and we're kind of concerned because if 10% of this is true, we're worried because James Montgomery is going to be presenting to our Rotary Club next week on ethics in business. And I was like, oh my God. I'm like, well, yeah, it's all true. And, and that's only like 10% of the story. And, so anyhow, then I'm calling my buddies. What was in the paper? I mean, I didn't know about this, and so then the next day they follow up. He had actually had the audacity to join like RSL, I forget what it stands for, but it's essentially like the American Legion in Australia. It's for veterans. And he tried to join the organization, and he's like, marching in their parades, representing himself as a veteran when he wasn't. And so that's in the paper the next day. So he ended up, losing his job, losing his. He had a volunteer job at a museum as a docent, explaining the mineral museums. He lost that. He lost the speaking gig at the Rotary Club. Didn't bother him a bit. He was just, oh, well, move on to the next thing.
Yeah. You probably stopped him from being able to access so many other potential targets too, because at that point, if you Google search his name or things, your website's going to come up. These articles are going to come up. I mean, what sort of ripple effect do you think that had?
Oh, absolutely. Because at least 7 with different women contacted me and said that, he tried to hook up with them, and, they researched him, found the website, and, then dumped him. So I absolutely know that happened.
Mm-hmm. Great. And he had a wife before you who died. There was some question about the circumstances under how she died. What do you think about all that?
Well, here's what I think happened. Because what I did was got a copy of her autopsy report and sent it, to a well-known pathologist who, this is what he does, is review autopsy reports. And he was kind enough to call me. And essentially, she had very high alcohol levels in her blood, but she died essentially of a heart attack. Okay.
And high alcohol levels in her blood at something like 10 o'clock in the morning?
Yes.
Seems strange. Okay.
Right. Yes. So, so what I think happened is that, he wiped her out as well. And he kept asking her to contact her parents who had money, and she would, call daddy, and daddy could never say no, and they would send money. But in the meantime, she had lost her job. And so what I suspect happened was that she lost her COBRA insurance coverage and started feeling badly and just didn't have the money to, go for, to get checked out. Because the pathologist told me, if she had gotten a stent, she would have been fine. So essentially he killed her, by depriving her of the money and insurance coverage so that, she couldn't get the health care that she need.
Mm-hmm. There was something about bruises in your book too, but any signs of violence?
But there were people who thought that, it may have been foul play. And I kind of suspected that. But the pathologist just said it was like a heart attack.
Okay. So this whole story, I mean, death and fraud and the international man of mystery and the whole thing, all this is over for you. You've let go. And then what do you do?
Well, then I started lovefraud.com, and we've had lots and lots of traffic over the years. Now what I do is I help people recover. And I talked about the energetic aspects of it as far as, trying to get people to process the pain. Well, 2 things that I do. First of all, most people, when they first contact me, are looking for validation. What's going on here? What is this person? And, why is he doing this? And I'll say things like, they tell me what he's doing. He's promising all these things. He's not following through. He's moving the goalposts. He's, criticizing me and all this. And I'm like, yeah, they all do that. And they're like shocked, because it's like, for people who haven't been there and don't understand, it's kind of shocking to realize that, this is a pattern. Yes. But by the same token, it's reassuring, because it's gratifying for the survivors to realize that they're not alone. That, because it's so disconcerting, and you're trying to talk to people, and those who haven't been there have no idea what they're talking about. They think you're exaggerating and everything. So, to first of all get validation is very helpful for people to realize, no, you're not crazy. No, what's happening here is that you're suffering from a trauma bond, from these experiences. So, I help people understand that. I sometimes offer suggestions as far as what to do, how to get through the divorce, different strategies you might want to consider. But then I really want to help people recover emotionally. And what that means is helping people process out those emotional wounds, as I said, not only from the experience with the sociopath, but things that came before, because the bottom line is that recovery is absolutely possible. I mean, you can overcome this. My story is an example of that. As I said, about a year after my divorce, I met a wonderful man, and I told him my story. He almost fell out of the banquette at the restaurant, but he was impressed that I was still standing, and so
Yeah.
we got married, and we've been married for 20 years now. So, and we're very happy, and that's one of the things is I mentioned about how there's a silver lining, and part of that is those all those walls of pain come down, and they allow you to open your heart again, without the different things that were in the way before. But also now, because the sociopaths exist, you don't fall for it again. And people are sometimes concerned about that. They're afraid they're going to fall for another one, and that does happen while you're still in the dark. Because essentially what happens is that, especially if you've been victimized as a child, and of course when you're a kid in this situation and your parents are doing this, you have no defenses. So all you can do is internalize what's going on, and then those wounds are there, and then they're attracting all these experiences, and but. So it does often happen that, you get targeted by one sociopath, and if you do not process those emotions and you don't work on your recovery, it's going to happen again. And so that's why it's so important to actually take the steps to make the decision, and then take the steps to get the pain out of your heart, because then you can truly move forward to the life that you want.
Mm. Well, Donna Andersen, for people who want to do more of that, before we get to our last topic, where's the best place for them to look for you online?
Oh, just come to lovefraud.com. Everything's there.
Okay, we'll put a link to that and your book, Love Fraud, in the description for people to check out. And Donna, my last topic is your journey, after all this. I mean, what's it been like to help so many people? You're really known in this space. You were doing it way before it was trendy. I mean, what's that all been like?
It's been gratifying, because there was a purpose. And, the people who can truly help they talk about wounded healers. And, that's kind of what has happened to me. I was certainly wounded. I mean, it was rough. I can talk about it now and smile and laugh and joke and everything like that. But it was rough. Going through it was rough. And, but because of that, I understand where people are, and I understand what they're going through. And so it has been gratifying to educate people and to help people. And it turned out that it was like a mission. I never expected to do it. I was a commercial copywriter. How in the world am I ending up doing this? But it is very gratifying. And now I truly enjoy helping people overcome what their experiences have been.
Yeah. Was there one maybe that stands out in your mind, someone you've helped, talked with?
Oh gosh, there's been so many. The main thing is that you learn to be compassionate towards people's experiences. It's more that because I've heard the same thing so many times, and what they've happened, to understand that it's totally human to get into this situation. Essentially what happens is that sociopaths take advantage of the fact that you're human. And, you're just reacting as a human would. You're expecting people to, follow the rules, the rules of society that we all follow. And you don't realize that they're just play acting, that they're pretending, and that it's all a sham. And so to be able to explain that to people and to reassure them that there's nothing wrong with you. You were having a normal reaction to being betrayed and to being devastated the way you were. Yes, it hurts, but it is possible to recover.
Yeah. Well, Donna Andersen, for for sharing that with so many people, for your work and your writing and sharing your story and everything, and for taking this interview with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was my pleasure for sure.